Hello, welcome to Calaveras Cannabis.Farm. Today I have with me Doug Oliver. He is our chief building official in charge of the cannabis program here in Calaveras County. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you for the invite.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really excited to have you here today. We need to talk about what the county feels about the program and how things are going.
Well, happy to answer any questions you have.
All right. Well, let's start with what's new. So I noticed on the website there's a 6 foot between the row requirement now. Is that correct?
Actually, the distance is the actual width of the row where they're going to be cultivating, and that comes from the changes in the industry in defining what the canopy is. The county ordinance has a very specific definition of canopy that doesn't align necessarily with the state, and it includes all space within a defined area where you'll be cultivating, even if there's no plants. Well, in the past that would mean you draw a big box on your property and say this is where I'm growing, but cannabis needs room or it gets mold and it gets illnesses, so they space the plants out. Well, by spacing the plants out, they're getting taxed for the space around the plants. So the industry started growing in rows, and they could define each row as their canopy and save on the canopy tax. And we went to that method, and we gave the option to the cannabis grower as to how wide the row should be, and not necessarily how far apart they should be, because, look, we're government. We don't understand how much space you need for each strain of plant in order for it to be healthy. So we just said define your cultivation area as your rows, and as long as your plants stay within that boundary, you're fine. When the cannabis program first started, there was a lot of different strains of the plant. So some people preferred to grow smaller plants where they could harvest maybe 3 times a year outdoor, or mixed lighting where you had varying size of plant with multiple rotations for harvest. But over the last few years, outdoor cultivation has swung almost entirely to larger plants, and you can end up with a plant that generally is 6 foot, but sometimes pushing 7-8 foot wide.
Okay.
So rather than our inspectors during our annual inspections seeing plants that were going outside and violating the permit requirements, we've been requiring that we know your plants are going to get at least 6 foot, so give us a boundary of 6 foot. If you know your plants are going to get bigger, well, then show on your plans and show that it's 8 foot so that we can not run into any unnecessary issues when we go do our annual inspections.
All right, so then if I'm understanding this correctly, the plant is the trough or pot, whatever you're going to put it in, is here. The plant grows up. It shifts over the pot because obviously the branches are growing.
Oh, yeah.
So now, instead of having, say, 3 feet, we've got 6 feet from tip to tip. And if that plant grows to 7 feet from tip to tip, then either that needs to be reflected on the plant or they have to cut their plant back by a foot.
Right, and that's the problem we run into is that typically your bud is growing on those outside branches. So
Correct.
If we ask you to reduce the size of the plant, we're actually asking you to cut out the harvested component.
Sure.
Which, it's not like you can just trim the parts that aren't growing, the harvestable product. So we don't want to impact anybody financially, so we would much rather say, give us a larger boundary that you can stay within so that we don't ask you to cut it back. Because I know the state has asked people to cut back their plant. That's a direct financial disadvantage. So we're trying to head that off.
All right, well, that sounds like a good plan. How many people, do you know, kind of roughly, how many people grow right directly in the ground, and then how many people grow in pots or troughs?
I don't have a number on that, but I can say that in most cases, they are in some form of fiber or fabric pot with their own mixture of fertilizer and soil.
Sure.
I've only encountered a handful of farmers who are growing directly in the soil, and usually they are going to put some additives in the direct area where they're planting their starters. But yeah, most of them are going to have their their own beds or pots, just so they can ensure they have the right mixture of nutrients.
Okay. So recently the county changed the ordinance for the background checks. And
Yes.
do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Board of Supervisors, I believe that was December 31st, they repealed the Cannabis Background Clearance Badge Program.
Okay.
Initially, that was intended to ensure a level of safety to the public by making sure that every worker and every owner had a clearance, a background check, to ensure that there wasn't any, active felons or recent convictions or anything related to either the illicit transport and sale of narcotics or any violent crimes. What we found over the last 5 years was that any legitimate cannabis grower is going to, in his own hiring process, weed those people out. We issued somewhere in the neighborhood of 850 plus or minus badges. Of those applicants, we've only had to deny, I believe, 12 in 5 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, so you could argue that going through the process is a deterrent, but at the same time, we found out that in the process of our annual inspections, the farmers just don't want criminal activity on their site, because if there is, it means it's going to directly impact their bottom line. They're going to have to deal with theft of their own product or their own equipment or damage of their equipment. Anything that would disrupt their business is a cost to them. So similar to any other business operation in the county, a business owner is going to do the right thing to police their own business just because it's good for their bottom line.
Oh, absolutely. Nobody wants to have somebody coming on their property and stealing things.
You're right.
I'm cautious about who I have come and do my weed eating, or actually anybody that comes to do work at my house, I'm cautious about it. And I just think that's common sense.
Right, and then there was very few incidences on cannabis sites, and they were typically turned in by the property owners that there was a problem, or the business owners. So the evidence is there that they're very keen to make sure that they're running a smooth operation.
Absolutely. But they're still being background checked by the state, so it's not like background checks have gone completely away. The owners, anybody that's a significant partner in a cannabis operation still gets a background check. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that was the other argument, that the owners are already being vetted by the state, and the state background check is generally a more in-depth look than what we can provide.
Sure.
So you got somebody who, one, meets that high standard, and then two, wants to maintain that on their property, because if you do have these issues, it could result in you not being able to cultivate in this county. So the board saw fit to repeal that, and so we're thankfully, we're working this process out. There's a few folks left that were in process that, they paid for the service. We are going to, give them that service, but in the end result is we're not going to be going looking for those badges or looking to vet those people, because the state will be doing that for the business owners.
Okay. And that actually saves the county some money, doesn't it? It's my understanding the fee that we charge for the CBCB didn't equate to the money being spent to validate them?
Yeah, so the base fee to start the process, get your badge, did recover the cost. However, you had to renew that permit or that badge, and in renewing that, the cost to renew was higher than the fee that we were charging. And if you were to raise that fee, that was viewed as a deterrent to compliance, because let's just say, if you factor in the seasonal help,
Correct.
where you can go from maybe 2 employees for most of the year, but on harvest season, you're going to have 20 people show up for about 2 weeks, right?
Right.
So you factor that cost, and if they have to get a badge, okay, that costs them, maybe $198 a piece. But when you come back every couple of years and do that for 20 people, that's a significant cost to the business owner for very little return. So a lot of good reasons to say that, essentially, I would say that the board's statement was, okay, this industry is matured enough that, and we can make a case to the public that this is a safe program. We don't need this anymore. So I think that was, in a way, a statement of increased trust in this industry to let that badge program go.
I agree with you. I think that's a good take on that. And, if the industry keeps going the way it's been going, then everything will be great. And if it's not, well, then, we'll adjust as we go along. So I think that we're getting in a good spot with that right now.
Yeah, I think we're heading in the right direction overall.
Yeah. So speaking of licenses and ways you can lose your license, how many licenses have we lost in this county over the last year?
That's a good question. I normally don't track how many that get lost because I'm more focused on trying to get more people into and through the process so they can start their businesses. But overall, let me just give you the entire snapshot.
Okay.
As of October 22nd, which was the end of the period where unexercised rights to apply would expire.
Okay.
So we took a count. We have 165 total applicants that were thorough applications that now we can say they have a vested right that does not expire.
Okay.
Of those 165, 88 of them have active licenses now.
Okay.
Okay, and of those 88, I think 30 of those licenses are duplicates on existing farms who need additional licenses to grow multiple acres, because you can only grow 1 acre of canopy per permit,
Okay.
and you need a right to apply for each permit. So
Okay.
they've purchased the rights from other people, and they submitted all of their paperwork and got multiple permits from our department. Of those, I believe 18 total have been revoked in the course of the last 5 years.
Okay.
Most of them are still a valid, well, I'll put it this way. The way the ordinance is worded, you just have to demonstrate that you had been in the process of a legal permit at the end of the urgency ordinance,
Okay.
and you have to have shown that you have not committed any, you haven't committed any code violations related to cannabis, and you haven't been part of a warrant where the sheriff's office has secured cannabis from you.
Okay.
And you can apply for a permit. So any of those revoked permits can be used again. They can file for a new permit and use that right to apply. It will not expire.
All right.
But the applicant has to justify that they haven't run across code compliance or had a warrant served on them. So
Right.
some of those applicants that have been revoked, as individuals, they won't be able to reapply because they were revoked because there was a significant code compliance issue or there was a warrant served. And so they have the right. They can't use it themselves, but they could sell it to someone else.
Okay.
Or, there's a couple different mechanisms where that right to apply can be used in a new application.
That's really good information to have. At least on if somebody lost their permit or got it revoked due to something that maybe they just were in the wrong spot at the wrong time, didn't have the right headspace for it, at least they could recoup some of their cost if they can at least have the opportunity to sell the right.
Yeah, and like I said, many cases you can reapply. I mean,
Yeah.
Many of the revocations were because of unpaid taxes.
Okay.
So if they pay their taxes and they reapply, we can reinstitute their permit and they can cultivate again. It's just a matter
Okay.
of funding and timing, and so they're still out there and they can still be used.
Okay, so let's talk about taxes a little bit.
Okay.
Right now we have a canopy tax, and that is going to happen whether you make $1 off your product or not. So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Okay. Well, the current framework of the cannabis tax, it's a tiered system based on either outdoor cultivation, mixed light cultivation, or indoor cultivation. The amount of canopy you can grow is also tiered off of that system. So for instance, you can only grow 10,000 square foot per permit for indoor,
Okay.
where you can grow up to an acre outdoor. When it comes to the taxable amount, you've got $2 per square foot outdoor, 3 for mixed light, 4 for indoor.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to remind myself because I don't normally get into the taxes. So if I misspeak here, I'm happy to
Okay.
correct that later. The Board of Supervisors recognized several years ago that the price had fallen dramatically, and so they allowed a reduction of tax by 60%, which means that outdoor cultivation is currently 80 cents per square foot of your canopy.
Okay.
There was a development recently due to a change in the definition of outdoor versus mixed light, which benefited a lot of cultivators because mixed light is now more narrowly defined as using electrical lighting.
Okay.
So outdoor cultivation that used to be considered mixed light just because they were blacking out their greenhouses in order to stimulate that growth, because they're not using electrical lighting, that's still considered an outdoor use, even though the process is intentionally preventing light from getting to those plants. So many of the cultivators opted to shift to outdoor on their license because it saved them $1, at the time, $1 per square foot on their canopy.
Well, it makes sense to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So as far as the taxes go, do we have a program so if I am unable to pay my tax on time, like if I can't pay my property tax on time, the county kindly gives me a payment program. They charge me 18% and add an additional 10% on top of my taxes. So it's a pretty good deal for the county.
Well, there is that mechanism. However, well, you got two different issues here, and I don't want to make an interpretation that would be in any way wrong as it relates to tax code.
Okay.
I know just enough to be dangerous here, so I'm going to
Sure.
so I'm going to say that
Probably there with you.
there is a late payment charge, and there are fines for late payment, just like every other tax. So that's
Okay.
managed by the tax collector's office. There's specific language in the cannabis tax code that identifies what is late and what is late enough to be revoked in our cannabis ordinance.
Okay.
So essentially, they have a month to pay their quarterly taxes, and if it's delinquent to that point, then there's 60 days for them to pay with any late fees or charges before the permit can be revoked.
Okay.
And early on, there was a lot of people who were delinquent in taxes because of the hardship on the price coming down, and there was a lot of struggling to meet the taxes before they adjusted the tax rate.
Okay.
And so, working with the Board of Supervisors, we implemented a process where if it's your first time where you're delinquent on your taxes and you could be revoked, we'd enter into a first-time agreement where, okay, you're going to promise to pay this off to the tax collector with your interest and fees within this time frame, and if you do, we reinstate your permit.
Okay.
Or we do not revoke the permit. And that got a lot of people back on track.
Okay.
But after 5 years, and part of our whole program, and we can go back on later, part of the whole program has been to educate the cannabis industry and kind of roll with the changes and continue to push out the information. So when there's a whoops in the industry, we want to work with them. But after 5 years of covering the whoopses, we have to recognize that they're a mature industry like every other industry in this county now, and so they have certain responsibilities. So you get a first time,
Right.
and you correct the issue, and we're fine. If you're delinquent again that far, we've already educated you, so now we're going to revoke that permit. When you've paid your taxes, then reapply.
Okay.
So that program is still in effect, and I will say that 90% of the people who ended up in that tax agreement did quite well.
Oh, good.
They got They got their taxes back up, and they have not been delinquent past those 60 days. But we do see that on average about 10% of the industry is delinquent on those taxes, from anywhere from a month to 2 months, but most of them don't cross
Into the
that
next
last
quarter.
line and get revoked.
Okay.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. My personal opinion on this is that the cannabis industry, now that it is kind of evolved to be consistent with some other agricultural commodities, you find that when you go to harvest, you don't get a check right away.
Right.
You know, it just like, you know, the almond ranchers, they don't get a check right away when they take it to the plant.
Right.
They got to take it to the plant, wash it, process it, package it, put it on a shelf, you know, and then the money trickles back down the other way. So it could be 3 months before you see anything, maybe longer. And in this industry, we're finding that it's a lot longer before they get offered an amount. So there's a challenge sometimes at meeting that tax payment when you're waiting for that payment to come in on your
Sure.
product. So we do see that every business is going to take their risks with taxes and other components in order to make ends meet. So I think the 60-day time frame has given most folks an appropriate buffer to be able to, you know, cover their bases if there's a shortage of revenue anywhere. And you know, the process we put in place has worked pretty well.
Okay. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, the tax got passed by the taxpayers. So if we want to make a change to it, for example, get away from the canopy tax and go to an income tax or a net profit tax, let's say, we'd have to go back to the voters?
That is correct. Yeah,
Okay.
the current adopted tax measure allows the board to adjust the amount of the taxes, but not the method.
Okay.
So if there's any change in the method, my understanding is that the voters do have to pass that.
Okay. So what do you see as far as the future of the cannabis industry? What are the challenges? What are the...
Wow. Well, I mean, it's been around for 5 years, but it's still relatively new, and I think one of the biggest challenges is not something that the state can really affect terribly well. The county definitely not, and that is there's no interstate commerce.
Ah, that's true.
No interstate commerce means you have a smaller pool of demand for the product. And that's primarily what's caused the price to crash so much, is that a lot of people wanted to cultivate, and they did, and they were good at it, and they grew a lot of it of varying amounts, and the price dropped dramatically because there's more product than demand.
Right.
And even early on, the value was dependent on the quality and the strain and you know the various producers and the quality of their farms. They could really push that and get a little higher price per pound. What I'm hearing from the industry now is that that's declined somewhat, and it's now bulk volume, and so that's a challenge because the value has dropped significantly. If there was any form of interstate trade with any states that would have legalized it, you'd have a broader demand, and that would stabilize or even increase that price somewhat, I should think. I mean, just by basic supply and demand principles, you'd think that would be a big help. And I think a lot of people in the industry are looking to see what's going to happen in that direction, but not something that we can control.
Sure.
But what I've found just in talking to some other jurisdictions that have legalized it, we're seeing safer operations with manufacturing. Our county does not allow manufacturing. Initially, though, in the start of manufacturing in California, you had more volatile extraction processes being tested. You had a lot of things that have prompted new fire codes and things like that.
Okay.
What we're finding is a lot more of the manufacturing wants to swing towards non-volatile extractions and things like that, which kind of signals to this county that there's safer methods, which means that there may be a potential. The board doesn't seem to have an interest in that right now. I think we're still letting the cultivation prove out over the years that it's a safer operation before they entertain that stuff. But
That makes sense.
but locally, in most of our business operations, you have all of the elements for that industry to generate effective revenue. You have raw materials, you have manufacturing, you have distribution, you have retail. Our cannabis program only allows cultivation and retail. So everything else has to be sent out of the county to be processed, tested, and then brought back into the county to the retailers. So anytime you add a middleman to that, you're adding a cost,
Sure, that makes sense.
which impacts the cultivator directly. Wherever possible, I'm seeing that the industry is adjusting to take in the cultivation, the processing, and the distribution all in one facility. And those people who've adjusted to that I think are more stable than some of the other locations that just do cultivation.
So are you talking about self-distribution then? When you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So as much as possible, they're trying to eliminate those extra steps and contain them within their own organization, within the state framework. So, and I would say that the people that are doing that, for the most part, are pretty successful.
Well, that's good to know. Now, you were having some meetings for the cannabis industry a while back, and are you going to have any more?
Yes. In fact, the plan is to have a quarterly meeting.
Okay.
And the purpose being to not just get the word out on anything that is being, changed at the state level or changed within ordinance, but also to vet any complaints from the public, from the cannabis growers, from law enforcement. We want to include as many organizations as possible on every side of every discussion, so that we can, get a read of the entire landscape and see if there's anything that we can bring forward to the board. The board of supervisors did ask initially on that committee that we look at the potential for several different types of business operations related to cannabis, such as manufacturing. Several months ago, the working group did provide a lot of good information, and there was some good discussion that was had on several sides of it. A report is getting drafted right now that will go to the board for their consideration. And then from there, I just want to continue to have these meetings, because the board may give direction to go one way or another, and the working group is going to be instrumental in bringing something forward that's going to be palatable by, not just the proponents, but the opponents of anything we're doing. We want to be very conscious of how we roll out anything that the board gives direction on, to make sure that we're not doing anything that could inadvertently be a detriment to the community. So it's going to be a lot of good discussion in the future, I anticipate.
I think that sounds great. So it'll be a working industry group similar to the builders group.
Yeah.
Right? You have a builders group that you guys meet?
Yeah. We used to meet quarterly. Now we meet whenever there's with the housing crisis, there was a couple of things we wanted to do, and we met with them to vet out pre-approved building plans and things like that. And it's been very helpful to get, architects and builders and the fire department. You put them all in a room and have a good discussion, and we generally get a really good sense of what we need to do. And so I really think that this cannabis working group can provide the same for this industry.
That's wonderful. So is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you think we ought to touch on?
Wow. Well, there's a lot that we can talk about, but just off the top of my head, I think the one thing that I can say is I want the industry and the public to know that the program that we currently have is 100% committed to ensuring a fair business practice while at the same time committing to a high degree of public safety. Our goal from the beginning was to make sure that the industry was treated no different than any other industry when it comes to the information we provide, the processes that we have, and the facilitative means that we have to keep people rolling as much as possible. And on the other side of that, an assurance from the public that as part of this process, you don't have bad chemicals in your water. You
Right.
don't have fire hazards. You don't have dangerous activity in your rural areas. And I think that we've done a very good job, for the most part, of policing that appropriately. I mean, there are outliers, there always are.
Absolutely.
But with time, they're remedied. You know, I made the comment, I forget who I made the comment to. I believe it was one of the cannabis industry folks. He said strict but fair. And I said, that guarantees that no side is happy.
Absolutely.
Because one side wants us to be overly strict, the other side wants us to be overly fair. So if we're strict and fair, you know, we're dovetailing everything in nicely to where there is a process, there is a level of safety, and we have what the board initially wanted, which was a robust and well-regulated cannabis industry.
Well, that sounds really good to me. Well, thanks for showing up today, Doug. I really enjoyed talking to you. And thank you, listeners. I hope that you enjoyed this show and will join us again. As you know, Calaveras Cannabis.Farm is a website. You can go and get more information. We promote the economically sound and ecologically sound cannabis business in Calaveras County.